Balancing the source of life with economic development, Ethiopia, Sudan and Egypt come together over a giant hydroelectricity dam, easing fears of a regional conflict over water. But can cooperation overcome competing interests? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Darine Abugaida. It's the longest river in the world and one that has given life to generations of Africans for millennia. But the Nile has come under increasing pressure in recent years as a growing population has come to depend on the resource. For Egypt, the water supply underpins its very existence. For Ethiopia, it's providing a new opportunity for economic development, while Sudan sees both needs and opportunities. Well, all three have now come together to sign a deal to cooperate over Africa's biggest hydroelectric dam being built in northern Ethiopia. It's been a contentious issue in a region where tensions have simmered for decades over control of the Nile. Well, the Grand Renaissance Dam is being built close to Sudan's border on the Blue Nile. That's about 550 kilometers northwest of the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. Ethiopia is hoping the dam will transform it into a regional power hub. It would give priority to downstream countries such as Sudan and Egypt for electricity generated by that dam. And the idea would be to regulate the flow of downstream water. Well, the project is being built by an Italian company at a cost of around $4.7 billion. It aims to produce 6,000 megawatts of electricity per year. For example, that's the 2015 target for Nigeria. Well, once completed, scheduled for 2017, it'll be the largest hydroelectric power plant in Africa. Emeke Emulu has more.
Rarely in international politics do we see a diplomatic agreement this animated. Ethiopia's Prime Minister, along with Egypt and Sudan's presidents, looking pleased with the deal. Ethiopia is building Africa's biggest hydroelectric dam on the Nile. Egypt and Sudan downstream had opposed the idea.
I want to assure the people of Egypt and the people of Sudan that this construction will cause no significant harm to the people of our three countries, and specifically to the people of Egypt.
The emphasis then is on reassuring Egypt. It's taken many months to get Cairo on board.
You will develop and grow, and I'm with you. But beware that in Egypt, the people live only on the water that comes from this river.
And drinking water in Egypt is already scarce. Nearly all of it comes from the Nile. Egypt's leaders had been worried the dam will reduce supplies even further at a time when its economy is weak and the population is growing. Back in 1929, colonial power Britain gave Egypt the right to veto any project involving the river. Ethiopia's ministers recently decided that simply wasn't fair. So construction began, and the dam is meant to put an end to rolling blackouts, which badly affects Ethiopia's economy. Sudan, which imports electricity from Ethiopia, would also benefit. The deal says all three countries will find a way to resolve their differences. The specifics are to be worked out later. Emeke Emulu for Inside Story.
Let's now bring in our guests. From Cairo, we're joined by Marwa Maziad. She's a Middle East researcher at the University of Washington who specializes in Egypt. From Washington, D.C., we have Mwangi Kimenyi. He's a senior fellow at the Africa Growth Initiative at the Brookings Institute. And over in Stockholm, joining us is Therese Magnussen. She's the director of the Stockholm Institute of Water. Thanks very much for joining us on Inside Story. Marwa, in the past, there has been a war of words between Egypt and Ethiopia, at least. Egypt fearing the dam would decrease its water supply. Why the change in stance now?
Well, we're witnessing today the event of signing a declaration of principles regarding the Renaissance Dam. The agreement is preliminary and the negotiations between the countries signing it are continuing. The change in the attitude is I think Egypt realizing that it is in its own strategic interest to approach the rest of African countries from a position of cooperation and construction and development, with the recognition of their own needs and aspirations for development and progress, rather than being stuck in the image of the hegemonic power in the north, historically dominant over the African countries, and trying to approach the relation in a way that would actually strategically empower Egypt within Africa. So Egypt is inserting back itself right in the heart of Africa. So,
Mwangi, is this a strategic move on Egypt's part, as Marwa is saying? I mean, in February 2014, Mwangi, Egyptian authorities said that Egypt is in fact going to take the international route to challenge the dam. They didn't do that. So what do you make of their change in stance?
Well, I think it's a very good move, and the agreement to me is very important in terms of a cooperative approach. As you know, Egypt has been adamant that the Nile River waters will be shared according to the colonial agreements. I think what is becoming very clear is that these agreements are not sustainable anymore. And as there is a great demand for development of projects in other states, there will be need to approach the Nile River waters from a cooperative arrangement. So to me, I think, although it may be strategic, I think Egypt is also realizing that the dominant position that it has taken, that it doesn't want to negotiate, doesn't want to move away from the colonial agreements, is no longer sustainable. So I think, to me, this is a very good approach. But, it needs to be done also with the other states. There need to be involvement of all the other states along the river basin because they also want to be involved in development projects.
Taraz, how will the dam benefit Egypt first, and then we'll talk about Ethiopia and Sudan?
Okay, thank you. I think there are many benefits, and it's very encouraging to see how the riparians, the countries, have really come to an agreement to continue the dialogue on the benefits. I think there are so many different ways to extend the regional integration and collaboration, focusing on this agreement. There are aspects of trade and food production, etc., that will benefit all the countries. So it's a very encouraging sign, and very positive that they have agreed to the principle to continue the discussions.
And for Ethiopia and Sudan? What are the benefits for them? Are they also, it sounds like you're saying they're strictly economical.
I would say that from a regional perspective, the economic part does play a huge role. What we have seen as SIWI in many of the processes and support and advice we are giving to different governments in different parts of the world when it comes to sharing waters is that countries want to engage on different projects, as the previous speaker just said. There are benefits of joint projects that move beyond the riparian countries engaged. So definitely there are benefits of energy trade, food trade, and maximizing the potential from irrigation systems and trade routes, for example.
Mwangi, what about security? Does the dam project threaten the security of any country or population?
I don't think so. I believe that in that agreement, one thing that we have also to accept is that really without the Nile, there is no Egypt. So there has to be some protection to make sure that Egypt continues to get the water it requires for survival. In that sense, I believe that the president of Egypt will not sign if there are concerns about the livelihoods of Egyptians. In terms of security, I think this will improve cooperation. As you know, Egypt had threatened to bomb the dam, which would have really increased the tensions and build up conflict in the region. So I think for so long as it's a cooperative arrangement, something that will be done through negotiations, looking at it over time, renegotiating to see how things, because things change, then it is a good move in terms of reducing the potential for conflict.
Well, Egypt has long since believed that it has historic rights to the Nile. It also points to two colonial-era treaties. Britain and Egypt signed an agreement in 1929 without consulting Ethiopia or indeed any other upstream countries. And this assumed Egypt's right to veto any construction projects that would adversely affect the country. And then there's the 1959 Nile Water Agreement between Sudan and Egypt, which allowed for the entire average flow of the Nile to be shared between the two, with Egypt taking the lion's share. But Nile Basin countries, this time including Ethiopia, agreed another deal in 2010, this one allowing them to work on river projects without Cairo's consent. Neither Egypt nor Sudan have signed up to that deal. So, Marwa, when Egypt says in this declaration that's come out that the countries agreed on the, quote, fair use of waters and not to damage the interest of other states by using waters, does this then mean that Egypt is moving away from its insistence on maintaining these colonial-era agreements that I was just talking about on water rights?
Look, Egypt will not give up, as your previous speaker said, its right to protect its population and its share in the River Nile. It has a 55 cubic share from the previous agreement. It will not defend that. However, I think we should problematize a little bit dam building in general. Egypt is part of the international community that wants progress and development and all of that, but dams are problematic in of themselves. Therefore, Egypt is adamant about the specifics of the dam, the specs. Is it going to be, what's the environmental impact? Even our own high dam, the Aswan Dam, had large environmental problems to it. Turkey, for instance, over the past decade, built 1,500 dams over the Euphrates, which rendered the vigorous river into some sort of lagoon and some small streams. So in a sense, we have to just be wary and careful with the impact of dams and development. So as I agree with your speakers that the approach Egypt is taking is one of collaboration, cooperation, construction, development. In fact, Egypt is very aware of the political, domestic, national impact of the dam within Ethiopia. So it's their own Suez Canal extension, or it's their own new capital of Cairo. So Egypt actually is aware of how that is a rallying national project for Ethiopia politically and domestically. So I think Egypt is coming to agree on the principle of development, of electricity. We cannot just, I've spoken to many Ethiopians.
So when you say principle of it, practically, does that mean we might see a change in Egypt's stance?
Oh, in the specifics, yes. If the specs of the dam come, I mean, they agreed to cooperate on the details of how the dam is coming about. But if the studies that are commissioned now shows bad impact or such, I mean, very technical studies, yes, there will be more negotiations, but in a spirit of cooperation. I don't think Ethiopia itself wants a dam, for instance, that breaks. A dam that after you have that much water behind it, if it's trying to hold the water, it would flood Ethiopia. So in a sense, we're all agreeing that Ethiopia needs electricity. Ethiopia needs to export electricity to these countries as far as Morocco and Egypt even, and Nigeria. We all want a sustainable project. But if the specs, we're going to disagree on how the impact environmentally that will affect the entire continent, yes, Egypt will come and renegotiate and there will be stopping. In fact, Egypt succeeded in stopping any funders, any external funders over the past year. So it has been, the dam is built nationally with the government-issued bonds. So it's a very domestic national project for Ethiopia that Ethiopians take pride in.
Right.
So
Therese, from what you know, Marwa, just to hang on for 1 second, Therese, from what you know, has Ethiopia given any reassurances to Egypt when it comes to some of the points that Marwa is raising?
I would like to stress that this process, this very encouraging step forward, has completely been driven by the countries themselves. And I really want to emphasize how important it's been to take one step back. As in Siwi, we have been more engaged in providing advice and support leading up to the current process, rather than being involved in the process as such. So I would say that only the countries know themselves what reassurances have been given. But I want to also emphasize that taking this very high-level diplomatic step is encouraging from many perspectives. And even though there will probably be discussions on the dam and on details, it is very encouraging to see how they have come to an agreement to continue the dialogue. And yes, there are, of course, many issues related to dam construction and so forth. But this is a process that have been driven by the countries, and they have the ownership of the process.
Okay, Mwangi, just back to my question that I asked Marwa when we were discussing the two colonial era treaties signed in 1929 and 1959. Now, the upstream countries say that they were not party to these Nile Waters agreements, and so they should not be bound by them. Excuse me. Are they right to want these agreements changed?
Oh, certainly. I mean, colonial governments didn't sign, when the British signed these agreements, they didn't have any interest for the other countries. Britain was involved in growing cotton along the Nile River. These were actually interests of Egyptians, but also of the British. The Africans now, the question is, should you inherit agreements that were not actually meant to benefit the Africans? It would be ridiculous to continue accepting those agreements. So there is something called the Nyerere Doctrine, which says that, we evaluate all these agreements. The ones that don't serve our interests, we don't accept them. And that's the way the Africans are moving. However, they don't want to make unilateral decisions, radical decisions that would affect the flow of water, impact negatively on Egypt. What they want through the Nile River Basin Initiative is really to negotiate. We want to construct dams. We want to do irrigation. Let's see how best to do it. And so the thing is,
do you see any point, Mwangi, where these treaties will actually be annulled or changes will be made to them?
I believe that they are not sustainable. They are not sustainable. They are not enforceable because, as you can see, Ethiopia started constructing the dam without the explicit permission of Egypt. So, in essence, these colonial agreements are falling apart if you follow the case of Ethiopia. I think the best thing is really not to go that route, is to have an agreement from the beginning so that all those countries that benefit from the Nile River are involved. The argument of historical rights is very important. Egypt has historical rights to water, but who doesn't have historical rights to the Nile River waters? If the waters flow through those countries, everybody has historical rights to those waters. So, I mean, it's totally ridiculous to say that Egypt has historical rights and other countries don't have. It doesn't make sense.
Okay, well, the United Nations is warning that the world is facing a 40% shortfall in water supplies by 2030, and that's based on current trends. A report released on Friday called for reforms governing the way water is managed and used in order to sustain supplies, cross-border cooperation between competing countries, as well as the management of water across competing developmental sectors to make sure that one group of stakeholders does not disadvantage others. Therese, so with the obvious significant increases in population as well as pressure to deliver development, to what extent is the demand for water a really important policy imperative in the region? And what are you doing about it as an organization?
A very relevant question. We know that the demand is increasing due to climate change, urbanization, population growth, the need for food, energy generation, etc. So the demand will only increase, which further puts this agreement into the context of a very positive way of creating a platform, the enabling environment to continue discussing the need to be more prepared and adapt to changing circumstances. And specifically in this region, of course, regional cooperation over shared waters is key for continued economic development and water security. What SEWE is doing through my team, Transboundary Water Management, is that we have a different set of components of doing research and translating the research into practical support and advice, capacity building and training. But we also focus very much on creating and facilitating dialogue between different levels of stakeholders, and be it government representatives, organizations, regional institutions, etc. We believe that a multitude of actors are important, and in a transparent way to discuss the future demands of water needs in order to be better prepared.
Right. Marwa, the former Egyptian president, let me put this to you, Anwar Sadat, said that the only matter that could take Egypt to war again is water. So that's what Sadat said. In your opinion, what is the most effective way to deal for Egypt to deal with any conflict that arises from the allocation and utilization of the Nile River's water?
Diversifying Egypt's dependency on water. If we think of Saudi Arabia or even the Western United States, if you've been following some of the drought stories there, some states are suing one another. Lawyers of water rights are thriving. So water is a big issue beyond Egypt. So aquifers, mapping and locating where aquifers could be, desalination processes and plants to be built. We have 2 Cs. Egypt kind of drip irrigation instead of the flood irrigation that we are used to, and actually conservation. I mean, you go to Egypt and you find taps and washers not replaced. A sense of urgency that we're not historically just as Herodot said, the gift of the Nile. We have to live the present moment of water scarcity and become innovative about our approach to dealing with water. And that will push us also beyond the valley. I mean, Egypt is 4% living on the valley of the Nile, but the rest is the desert. So how can you adjust to be a desert climate and actually make it? So we have 2 seas, the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. So some very innovative ways we can be cutting edge in the technology around water resources. So, but that doesn't mean that within the Nile debate, the strategic interest of Egypt is to really be back in the heart of Africa. And we've seen that in the economic conference. Africa, the repetition of this conference will be that the entire nation and the entire continent thrives while Egypt is thriving. So we cannot be saying that yesterday, and then the next day we're telling Ethiopians, you cannot develop. You cannot have electricity. You cannot. You see the Nile passing in your lands, and you're not actually. You're facing drought.
Okay.
So cooperation is part and parcel of the strategy,
right.
But also diversification of water resources is a must for Egypt right now.
Mwangi, just final word to you. So, is this the deal that's needed to minimize the risk of conflict over water? Can cooperation between these 3 countries overcome their competing interests?
Yeah, I just, with a colleague, published a book on governing the Nile River. And what has happened is a very good example of what you think is sustainable. But it must extend to the other countries in the Nile River basin, so that there is really agreement on the use of sharing of the water, and really conservation issues, better technology in terms of the use of the water are very important. So it's really cooperation that we call for in our book, and this is a very good start, in my opinion.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Marwa Maziad, for joining us from Cairo, from Washington, D.C., Mwangi Kimenyi, and Therese Magnussen from Stockholm. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. Thank you for watching. If you have anything that you'd like to add, you can do so. You can go to our program page at aljazeera.com, and there you can post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also tweet us at AJ Inside Story. I'm Darine Abougada. From myself, from the whole team, goodbye for now.